From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
President Trump threatens 25% secondary tariffs on countries that import Venezuelan oil. Says auto and pharmaceutical tariffs are coming soon. Even as markets rally on Bloomberg's reporting that the levies going into effect April 2nd might be narrower in scope than feared.
We'll have more with Greta Peisch, former general counsel for the U.S. Trade Representative, this hour, and be joined by former prosecutor Akerman as an appeals court today considers the administration's deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members.
Plus, U.S. and Russian officials negotiating in Saudi Arabia today over a ceasefire in Ukraine after talks between American and Ukrainian teams yesterday. Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, joins us live with the latest.
And that is where we begin this evening, after Secretary of State Marco Rubio characterized the state of play of those negotiations this way during a cabinet meeting at the White House earlier.
There is no military solution to this war. It has to end through negotiation. Today, even as we speak, we have teams on the ground in Saudi Arabia meeting with the respective sides in the hopes of making progress towards this outcome that we all want to see. Ultimately, I think that the only chance we have for peace is through the president's leadership, and you've shown that, and we hope it'll bear fruit, and today will hopefully be one step more in that direction.
Joining us now is Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Ambassador, thank you so much for the time. The U.S. described yesterday's talks with Ukrainian officials as productive. Can you shed some light as to what exactly has been produced to this point?
Kaylee, Joe, thank you very much for having me. As you know, it's already the second time our teams meet there. The previous meeting was a little bit more than a week ago. And we really have great discussions with our American colleagues and friends. Ukraine did not start this war. We want peace more than anyone. And Ukraine is committed to peace. As President Zelensky repeatedly said, I mean, we are ready for the full ceasefire. We are ready to discuss partial ideas of ceasefire. Ukraine is not going to be the problem here because we were not the problem to start with. So it was really good discussions. I mean, there is nothing we can publicly say now, but we really hope that together with both State Department and National Security Advisory's team, who are making great efforts in bringing all of us closer to peace, we will be able to convince Russians to move closer to peace.
You mentioned partial ceasefire. How would you describe the status of this energy infrastructure ceasefire that we've heard about? Has it actually taken effect? Is the clock running on this?
Well, we are discussing it, and Ukraine actively supports it. Again, we believe the idea of a full ceasefire, which President Zelensky not only commended, but again, we embrace it wholeheartedly. It's a great idea. President Trump suggested the full ceasefire for 30 days. That's a great idea, actually. That would save lives. Unfortunately, we need Russia to agree to that in order to be. But you see right now, today, a horrible tragedy in Sumy, you know, more than 90 people wounded. Yesterday, Kyiv attacked, family killed, a father and a 5-year-old. Day before yesterday, Zaporizhia, 2 days ago, again, church in Sumy. I mean, every day Russia continues to attack. And that's why not only Ukraine is committed to peace and wants peace, but we need peace.
Do you think Russia shares that commitment to peace at this point? Is the administration misunderstanding where Russia actually is on this right now?
No, I think we have good understanding between us and the U.S., and we're working really hard to get to peace. Now we will see with Russia. They have to show it not only by words, but with their deeds.
We heard from President Trump on a potential minerals deal with Ukraine. Just about completed. We'll be signing it soon, he said. Are you really that far along?
Well, you know, as the former Minister of Finance and during my 4 years as an ambassador, I always pushed for bigger cooperation between U.S. and Ukraine. And there are many areas we can do that. I mean, mineral deals is one of them, energy, infrastructure, innovations and engineering. Everywhere, all the sectors where Ukraine can be a solution to so many global problems and where we together can actually add to security and to prosperity of both of our countries. So our first Vice Prime Minister and Secretary Bessent are in active discussions. And the more we can do together on the economic and investment front, the better for both of our countries. Of course, peace is something that is on everyone's mind. We need for Russia to stop this aggression, and we need to return to peace. But there is a lot we can do together.
Well, you mentioned energy there. Is it going to stop at just the minerals deal? Because we now have the administration floating ideas around controlling Ukrainian nuclear power plants, for example, having an ownership role to play. Can you shed some light on those conversations?
Well, again, as I said, there are many industries where we can cooperate. And Ukraine energy is one of the top 4 or 5 industries where Ukraine, even during the war, at the beginning of this full-fledged war phase, Ukraine was exporting electricity. That's why Russia is attacking our energy, because this is one of the competitive advantages that we had. Similar with agribusiness, similar with infrastructure, and again, defense tech and everything else. We really would like to cooperate more with U.S., of course, with European partners and others, but I think there is a lot we can do with American companies.
Ambassador, I just want to put a finer point on a couple of things that we've brought up with the spirit of cooperation in mind, and I understand the sentiment of that statement that you're making. But is a minerals deal about to be signed, or will more negotiations be required? And is an energy infrastructure ceasefire actually in effect? Has it been signed?
Well, we are discussing it very actively. Definitely is not going to be, I think both teams are very focused on doing it and doing it pretty fast. But of course, as we all know, in investment and finance, you have to discuss everything. The more you agree and discuss everything before you sign, the better and partnership afterwards. But we are doing it at a very quick pace.
Speaking of quick pace, the White House appears to be targeting for a full ceasefire to start April 20th. Is that a timeline that Ukraine sees as realistic? It's just weeks away at this point.
Well, even more than a week ago, our president said we are ready for it. So, again, it takes 2 to dance. And Ukraine wants this ceasefire. We are ready for ceasefire. We actually want a full-fledged and just peace. But it's not going to be Ukraine that is going to be impediment for that.
We heard from U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, who had a lengthy meeting. He's had a couple of sessions with Vladimir Putin, and said over the weekend he does not regard Putin as a bad guy, talking about how much of the narrative here involving sham referendums led to these Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. Does that make you question the White House, this administration, as a credible actor in these talks, if they're saying that Vladimir Putin is not a bad guy?
It doesn't make me question. We all can have our own opinions. I just shared yesterday a video that a member of my family shot when the apartment complex in which he lives was targeted by Shahed drones. So I have my opinions about Russians who attacked us in 2014, and they attacked us in 2022, and every day they kill peaceful civilians in Ukraine. So, look, right now the focus is on how to get to peace and how to get to justice. And there will be lots of time to discuss different opinions, but we have to keep the focus on what is important now.
Well, if it's about getting to a just peace, what concessions has Ukraine put on the table that you're willing to agree to in order for that to happen, or that the administration has asked of Ukraine?
Right now, the discussion is on how to get to this, and I think Ukraine is showing clearly that we are committed to peace. We need to hear and see the same commitment from Russia, and after that, that's why we have teams working and negotiating, and it's going to be process probably, but I think it's not about concessions that Ukraine is willing to make. Ukraine is committed to peace. We want peace. We are defending ourselves. We are not the ones who started this war. But again, as we said, hopefully with under the leadership of President Trump, with his vision of peace through strength, we will be able to get there.
What will follow these sessions once these talks in Saudi Arabia are over? What's the next step?
Let's wait and see. Our team is still there, and hopefully in the coming days we will hear whether we are moving forward. Hopefully, yes. And we'll see the next stages again. More than a week ago, President Zelensky said Ukraine is ready for an unconditional ceasefire.
You want to see all three parties at the table for the next session? At the same table?
You know, again, it's not up to me on how it's going to be done. The focus is to have the comprehensive peace, but at least a full ceasefire, which Ukraine agreed to.
It's great to have you back with us at the table. Thank you, Ambassador. Ukrainian Ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, on Bloomberg. Coming up on the program, new color on the Trump administration's tariff strategy today could be welcome news to some U.S. trading partners. We'll talk about it next with Greta Peisch, former general counsel for the Office of the United States Trade Representative. It's next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Announcing cars very shortly, and we already announced steel, as you know, and aluminum. We'll be announcing pharmaceuticals at some point in the not too distant, because we have to have pharmaceuticals. We don't make pharmaceuticals anymore in our country. And if we have problems like wars or anything else, we need steel, we need pharmaceuticals, we need aluminum, we need a lot of these things.
President Trump during a cabinet meeting today talking tariffs as reporters and, of course, members of the cabinet listened on. The president promising widespread tariffs, as we told you, set to take effect April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs. But those plans could be getting changed or pared back, as Bloomberg now reports. President Donald Trump's coming wave of tariffs is poised to be more targeted than the barrage he has occasionally threatened. Aides and allies say a potential relief for markets gripped by anxiety about an all-out tariff war. Here with more now, Bloomberg's Enda Curran. It's great to see you, Enda. The markets certainly were feeling better about things today. Then the president goes on Truth Social and adds to the pile. Any country, he says, purchasing oil or gas from Venezuela forced to pay a tariff of 25%. Are things actually more clear today than they were on Friday? He says he could give many exemptions to countries on April 2nd.
Well, it seems we had three kind of new developments today. We had that tariffs on cars are coming soon. We had that there will be some breaks for those in the reciprocal tariff bucket. Not quite sure what that means, but some breaks there. And then to your point, we will have secondary tariffs on countries doing business with Venezuela on oil. Now, taking it all together, I think it suggests that this continues to be a moving feast, that the details of this are being worked out. It's clear that broad-ranging tariffs are coming next week. We just don't quite yet know on what products per se and on which countries will be most impacted. That's where the confusion is. But clearly, and that's where the market's taking some hope that maybe things won't be as bad as they thought. Yeah. But clearly, at the same time, though, we are going to get another barrage of tariffs. That was clear from the president's comments today, I think.
Well, if it's not as bad as thought on some things, could it be worse than thought as to what the understanding was as to what the levels against China could actually look like? Because as Joe is talking about the 25% tariff on those that import Venezuelan crude, that's China, which already has 20% tariffs on its goods. And the president suggested this would be 25% on top of that.
Yeah, the stacking. China would definitely be among the most vulnerable if he pushes ahead with the tariffs on those doing business with Venezuela oil. No doubt about it. But in terms of what he announces next week, I mean, there had been some expectation that autos might come off the table. But the president today is suggesting autos are back on the table. He also has suggested sectoral tariffs will still come at a later point, like the pharmaceuticals. He said that's going to happen. And there's also expectations for lumber and semiconductor tariffs. So, maybe next week we don't get the broad blitz of tariffs that perhaps the president had signalled once. But he's making clear all of this is happening. There's a sequence. It's just a question of when all of it drops, I guess.
I feel like I'm getting more confused the longer we talk about this. Is the market placing its optimism on something that's actually changed here, or are we going to be talking about another sell-off on Liberation Day, as the president calls it, next week?
Well, I think optimism is, and as our colleague Josh Wingrove has noted out, that there is some targeting going on here. It's not the broad brush reciprocal tariffs on everyone and everything on April 2nd. Clearly, that would have been Herculean to begin with. So now they're narrowing down to do what they can do. So maybe that's where the optimism is. We do have talks going on as well, by the way. The EU Trade Commissioner, by the way, coming to DC this week. Other governments also talking with the US administration to try and get what relief they can. So a lot going on, perhaps not as broad-brushed or as bad as maybe initially feared back, say, in February, but still a fairly important moment next week for US economic policy, I would say.
Indeed. Bloomberg's Enda Curran will be covering it for us. Thank you so much. And joining us to continue the conversation is Greta Peisch. She's a partner at Wiley, Rein and a former general counsel for the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative under President Joe Biden. Greta, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. When we consider what actually we may get next week, if these are tariffs layered on top of one another, in the instance of Venezuelan-related tariffs or secondary tariffs, rather, on China, what will the ramification of that be? How does this rollout actually work when you're inside the USTR?
Well, we haven't yet seen an executive order, action from the president implementing the tariffs he's proposed on importers of Venezuelan crude oil. So in part, we have to see what exactly it looks like. But you're right that if this is stacked on top of other tariffs, we're going to see an even greater impact on trade than we already have across the board, particularly with China, but with other markets potentially as well.
Do you feel, Greta, like we know more than we did on Friday? There was euphoria today in the market. Bloomberg News pointing to some flexibility at least. And the president acknowledged that today when he took questions at the White House. There could be a lot of countries with exemptions. Does that make you feel better?
Well, maybe a bit, but I would say that there's still a lot of uncertainty out there and a lot that can change between now and April 2nd. As we've seen, there's a lot of flexibility in the authorities that the president is using in this space. Certainly, he could propose tariffs without putting them in effect on April 2nd, for example. So you could see some announcements that really kick off a negotiation or try to turbocharge those negotiations that may already be happening. So you talked about the EU being in town this week. If he puts a number on the table publicly next week, that could further those negotiations. It could be another tool for leverage and discussions.
When we consider the actual impact that will be felt at home of all of these different tariffs, the administration has often floated this as a short-term pain, a one-time price increase. But the way with which the administration is talking about it, the president specifically is talking about these tariffs coming soon, some tariffs coming down the road. Does that essentially mean that this will not be one time, that companies, importers are going to be constantly having to adjust and move their prices accordingly?
Well, I think at the very least, what a lot of businesses are looking for next week is some certainty as to what the timeline is and what we can be expecting. So one scenario for next week is that the administration launches a number of investigations under Section 232, which is the authority that was used to impose the steel and aluminum tariffs, which were started back in the first Trump administration. Now, that's an investigation that takes some time, usually months, that involves input from interested sectors and the public, and really builds in an on-ramp to the tariffs. And so those announcements, though, that lay out what is the administration planning in these sectors, such as autos or pharmaceuticals, as well as what are those tariffs that are being proposed, perhaps across the board with respect to certain trading partners. A map, a roadmap, if you will, of what the administration is pursuing and where it's all heading would really give a lot of information to businesses that just have a lot of uncertainty right now.
With that in mind, earlier today, Bloomberg spoke with Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic and spoke to the potential inflationary side of tariffs. Listen.
Historically, when tariffs have played out, there's been a one-time jump in prices, and then the economy's returned to its usual trajectory, such that policy doesn't have to respond to it. For me, I think there is a question about whether that's going to happen this time. We've just gone through a period of elevated inflation, so it is very much on the consumer's mind. And I fear that they might be more sensitive to higher prices today than they have been in the past, but they might not.
Greta, what does that mean for the Fed in the second half of the year?
Well, I very much agree with the comments. What you generally see with tariffs is it is not a contributor to inflation. Inflation is really an economy-wide phenomenon that has a lot of different inputs. And it really depends on the labor market, demand, many other factors. And that said, I think this is one of those many factors, and it is being used in a unique way. We don't know how consumers and businesses are going to respond to it exactly. And so I expect there'll be a wait and see, and they'll have to respond to that market overall, not just the tariff actions.
Greta, it's great to have you back. Greta Peisch, partner. Wiley, Rein, former general counsel for the Office of the USTR. Great to have you with us this evening on Bloomberg. Coming up, highlights from our exclusive interview with one of the voices in President Trump's ear when it comes to global trade. Stephen Miran, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, sits down with Bloomberg next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Just before becoming chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Stephen Miran wrote a paper where he outlined ways to, quote, restructure the global trading system. Among them, a global currency accord.
Today on the early edition of Balance of Power, Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsin asked Miran about his views, especially now that he's advising the president.
I'm glad you brought that up because this paper seems to have taken on a life of its own against all my intents. Look, I'm pretty clear in that paper that it's a catalog of available options and, you know, it's a recipe book, and I'm trying to evaluate how useful or not useful or easy or difficult those various recipes are to make. Some of them are easy, some are tough. Some are, some are filling, satisfying meals, and some will leave you hungry again in a half an hour. And my goal in that paper was to provide an evaluation of options, so that a cost-benefit analysis of risks and rewards, so that whoever was making the decision, sort of could have that available if helpful. To be clear, I'm not the chef, right? The president is the chef, and he's been very clear that he's focused on fair and reciprocal tariffs. He couldn't be clearer.
That was chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, Stephen Miran. You can catch that full interview on the terminal or online, and you'll find that Saleha actually did press him as to whether or not there could be some kind of global currency accord, the so-called Mar-a-Lago accords that so much has been made about. And he reiterated right now President Trump is focused on tariffs pretty much exclusively, though he didn't rule out that being something that's entertained down the road, to use his words.
It's pretty clear the directive has gone out of the White House. This is the priority right now, correct? Of course, tax cuts might be the other one, and there'll be an important meeting at the White House about that tomorrow. Remembering, Kaylee, when we go back to the days before the administration began, Scott Besson and others said you can't have one without the other. It was the relationship between revenue-generating tariffs and tax cuts. That seems to be the directive for now.
Yep, and of course, it's a story we'll continue to follow. Just as still ahead, we're following a major law firm's decision to cut a deal with the president. It's reverberating through the legal community, and we'll have more on that with Nick Akerman, former assistant U.S. attorney, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
These judges are out of control. We are going to fight back, and we are going to win. And the Supreme Court will be ready to hear these cases. Again, these are federal district judges who are trying to control our nation's agenda. These judges they are losing, and they realize that, and we are going to win.
That's the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, on Fox News yesterday. Today, a federal judge ruling that his temporary order will remain in effect, preventing the Trump administration from deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act, specifically the centuries-old wartime law that we've told you about, rarely used. A federal appeals court considering arguments on the case this afternoon. And with us now is Nick Akerman, former assistant U.S. attorney, former Watergate prosecutor. Mr. Akerman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. We should be specific that this is about that wartime act. Brings us back to 1798. Judge James Boasberg has only blocked the deportations that rely on this law. Does the White House, does this administration simply need to provide evidence that these are in fact hardened criminals, gang members, as has been alleged? Wouldn't that put this all to rest?
Well, I think what will put it to rest is once each of these individuals that was deported to this hellhole in El Salvador have an opportunity to present evidence that they're not a member of the gang that Trump claims they are. So far, the administration has come forward with no evidence that any of these people belong to that gang. There has been other evidence brought forward by the plaintiffs in this case that some of these people had nothing to do with this alleged Venezuelan gang. So what it really comes down to, despite the fact that this law was in effect back at the founding of our republic, that comes down to due process being given to the individuals who are going to be deported and have been deported. That's what it all comes down to. The judge didn't rule on the validity of that ancient law. He didn't rule on other aspects of this. But the bottom line that his decision reached today was that each of these individuals was entitled to a due process hearing.
Well, let's get a taste of what it was like in the hearing today around these deportations, where the judge on this appellate panel, one of the three of them, Patricia Millett, made a pretty fiery comment when speaking to the Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Here it is.
There were plane loads of people. I mean, it's a class action. There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here, where the proclamation required the promulgation of regulations, and they had hearing boards.
Putting aside her characterization of the actual treatment here, Nick, to her point on this being about the Alien Enemy Act, you were just speaking about this, describing it as an ancient law. Is that ultimately what this will come down to if due process questions are sorted out, whether or not President Trump has the legal authority to use this, given we are not actively at war with Venezuela?
Well, I think there's a real problem with the use of this statute because we are not at war with Venezuela, or we are not at war with these gangs. What it comes down to is due process and whether or not they have an opportunity to be heard and to present evidence. I mean, I think that the judge, in his opinion today, went through the entire history of that act. And even in World War II, when individuals who were of German descent, Italian descent, that were being deported under this act, they had hearings. Here, there was no hearing. It looks like, in fact, that what the Trump administration did was to move this as quickly as possible, try to keep it as quiet as possible, and move people out before anybody could get a hearing. And I think that's the part on this entire matter that's absolutely reprehensible.
It was interesting hearing from the judge on this. Clearly fed up with what he has been hearing from the administration. Going back to the hearing last Friday, he talked about his concern about, quote, intemperate and disrespectful language. He said, I'm not used to hearing from the United States. Nick Akerman, have we just entered a new age, a new realm for the way decorum is considered in court? Or could this administration jeopardize its own case with the language that we've heard, including calls for the impeachment of this judge?
Well, I think both of those. The answer is yes to both. First of all, They have started an entirely new way of reacting to a judge. And what's really remarkable here, it's not just lawyers from the Justice Department. These papers are actually signed by the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and his assistant. So it's not like it's just the attorneys for the Department of Justice. It is the highest level of the Department of Justice that is signing off on this language that's used in the papers. And so what is really at issue here is whether or not they simply ignored the judge's order at the time he gave it last week and sent out those planes and refused to turn them around. And it wasn't because anybody believed necessarily that people were innocent, or if they were members of the gang, that they shouldn't be deported. The question came down to whether or not they were entitled to a hearing. And this Department of Justice totally ignored what is essentially always been a basic right under that statute going back to World War II and World War I and the War of 1812.
Nick, I'd also like to ask you about what we're seeing with big law firms who have in the past litigated against the former Trump administration or otherwise have been involved in cases related to it. Obviously, we saw the agreement that the firm Paul Weiss made with the administration, but also a memorandum that went out from the Department of Justice around those legal efforts and how they could potentially be targeted now by this administration. What do you make of what actually is going on and how it changes the nature of the relationship between the courts and the White House, or what happens in court, rather?
Oh, it's huge in the sense that, I mean, as I wrote today in my Substack column, Legal Politics, Trump has basically taken this on his retribution tour against lawyers and law firms and has gone nuclear on them. It all started with Perkins Coie, another big law firm that represented Hillary Clinton and other Democrats. They at least stood up to Trump. They went into court. They got a temporary restraining order. The judge came down hard on the administration, but that didn't stop him. A couple days later, what did they do? They went after Paul Weiss. And with respect to what they are doing with these executive orders is basically saying that they cannot do business with the government, that they are going to not have security clearances for any of their lawyers, which means they can't represent the government in certain cases. And it also affects their clients because clients are going to leave. And if you look at the Paul Weiss situation, they were kind of put into a bind in the sense that they had clients that were leaving and they had headhunters calling their lawyers and recruiting people knowing that the firm was in big trouble, which is why they were forced into a settlement here. Now, on top of all that, the problem with that settlement is it has just encouraged Donald Trump to go even further because the day after he entered into that settlement with Paul Weiss, he issued the memorandum that you referred to before that essentially puts a warning out to all lawyers that if you're going to be working against the government and representing clients against the government, that you're going to be looked at very carefully, that if we find that you misstep in any way, that we're going to try and get sanctions on you. We're going to basically go after your clients and take away their government contracts, take away your ability to have security clearances. And on top of it all, to make matters even more outrageous, they've also said that they're going to look at their behavior going back 10 years from today. So it's not just what they're doing in representing clients in legal cases currently, but this is going to go back in time to even further incur retribution on lawyers that they don't like. And the problem here is that particularly with big law firms, even small firms, individual lawyers are going to be very wary about going into court and representing indigent clients against the government or even clients that are paying money, because the government has made it clear that if you do this, we're going to come after you. We're going to take away your clients. We're going to take away your clients' contracts. We're going to make it impossible for you to deal with the government.
Nick, we're just about out of time, but I have to ask you about this story that everyone's talking about today in Washington by the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg. The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans is the headline. He was invited for some reason to a Signal chat. Members of the cabinet on there, including the defense secretary, says he sent him and others war plans for attacking Yemen. The White House has acknowledged this. The president was asked today about the Espionage Act when he was in front of reporters. He didn't answer it. Does it apply?
Well, I'm not sure if it applies because it depends if they had the criminal intent here. But clearly, this was outrageous. There is no excuse for using a public means of communication. You can rest assured that the Russians could be listening in on that. The Chinese could be listening in on that. And if you listen to this conversation, it all rings true. They're talking about whether or not they're going to clear up the Suez Canal and open up the shipping. And what do they talk about? They talk about, well, should we really do it? Because we don't have that much shipping. The U.S. doesn't, maybe 10%, but it's the Europeans that we're doing this for. And maybe there's some way we can get the Europeans to reimburse us for this raid on the Houthis. I mean, this is just absolutely off the charts. One, it's terrible that they're using public means to communicate on war plans. And two, that this is the way they're making decisions based on whether or not they're going to be reimbursed for having made a raid on the Houthis. I mean, there's just a lot of little pieces in this that are really off the charts.
All right, Nick Akerman, former assistant U.S. attorney and former Watergate prosecutor, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll have more on that security breach still ahead with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective, I can tell you that.
President Trump at the White House today responding to a story that has captivated Washington as The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg writes, "The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans." The headline reporting that earlier this month he received a connection request via the encrypted messaging service Signal from National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. Goldberg says he found himself in a chat room with Waltz and other members of President Trump's cabinet, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who later sent operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen. A White House spokesman says the report appears to be authentic. The administration is reviewing how a journalist was added to this conversation. Joining us now, our signature panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to have both of you with us. I don't even know what question to ask you, Rick, other than can you believe this?
Yeah, this is pretty amazing that the entire national security and intelligence apparatus, the leadership in this administration, participated on an unsecured chat group and has not, and nobody's been fired yet. I mean, like, this is an incredible breach. I guess the question today is the head of, national intelligence conducting an interagency damage assessment? Yeah. Are we looking into what kind of critical mistakes could have been made through this kind of a chat group? Because, look, suffice it to say, there are a lot of organizations and countries around the world who would be desperate for this kind of information and have the capability of hacking Signal at any time they want to. Right. And so this isn't just a isolated instance. The president makes a good point. The attack went off without a hitch, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work that way next time. And are we still going to have these kinds of violations of use of secret information?
Well, so I guess it becomes a question of what actually requires that accountability. What entities, what people? Jeannie, are we going to see a Republican-controlled Congress launching investigations into this, or do you view that as unlikely?
I view that as unlikely, although we are hearing from Democrats in the House and some in the Senate who are talking about an investigation. And listen, one is needed. The reality of this is every child who goes to school and every adult who goes to university in this country and around the world or takes a job is taught you only conduct work or school business on the appropriate using the appropriate technology. And so to imagine that the people in charge of our top secret classified information have decided to jump on what they call an encrypted or secure chat and to add somebody who's a reporter from The Atlantic, Goldberg, who wrote that piece in 2020, after all, and to add him by mistake and then to discuss classified information, it is mind-numbingly stunning, and it is a complete violation of the way that we treat classified information in this country, and quite frankly, any other country that has top-secret information.
A lot of this has to do with motivation, according to Nick Akerman, with regard to potential violations of the Espionage Act here. We should note the Atlantic chose to not publish those war plans and chose not to disclose at least one sensitive name that was revealed in that chat as a representative for the CIA. Is the White House lucky that it picked the Atlantic?
Well, assuming it picked anybody, right? I mean, like, this could have been just an error in judgment, right? You know, somebody finger hit the wrong button when they were putting this together.
Maybe lucky they got the Atlantic.
And didn't police it. But that's my point. I think that the president, instead of attacking the Atlantic, should actually be saying thank you very much for helping us preserve our secrets, because they easily could have written that article with all those names associated with it and the plans in advance of the attack, because they had that information and could have done it. The fact that we are relying on the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic to keep our secrets, and it is, I think, an incredible embarrassment to our intelligence community. Look, one of two things happened. Either we had an incredible breach of our intelligence and protocols associated with secret information, or it was espionage, which meant somebody put him on there intentionally. And one or the other, we deserve an explanation as to where we are.
Yeah, and we'll, of course, have to wait for that actual explanation. We have no evidence to support either of those theories at this time. The National Security Council did describe this as inadvertent. But, Jeannie, when we consider that it wasn't just specific war plans that were discussed, but also a dialogue around whether these strikes should be carried out in the first place, including Vice President J.D. Vance expressing some doubt and suggesting the president didn't understand the messaging around this. Is that revealing to you?
It is. And of course, the vice president's office is now sort of discounting the idea that there was some discussion. But that is part of what is so stunning here. It seems like in typical Trump administration fashion, Donald Trump said, let's bomb the Houthis, and off they went. And by the way, the breach is not only inadvertently adding somebody, it is going on that channel to begin with. We have secured government channels for these kinds of discussions, which are, by the way, best held face-to-face in the Situation Room. And so you look at all of this together, and it suggests that there was not the kind of discussion prior to making the decision. They jumped on this app and started debating about it. And my best... You know, I had a few things about this story would be funny if this wasn't so serious, including the poor spokesperson for the NSC who was, you know, saying things like, well, this shows that there was thoughtful discussion. Really? Thoughtful discussion on a Signal app between the top national security officials in our country? And then also the fact that they were all using emojis afterwards to congratulate themselves on the bombing. I mean, the whole thing is embarrassing.
American flags.
Yeah, the fist bumps and fires. Yeah, the flex was something else. Rick, this comes after a weekend in which we saw Steve Witkoff do an interview with Tucker Carlson praising Vladimir Putin at times, said he's not a bad guy, and talked about their interactions. When you start building the composite here of these stories, what does it do to our partners, our allies, who obviously share sensitive information, never mind strategy, with the U.S.?
Yeah, I'd say two things. One, it also affects our own intelligence operatives who put their lives at risk to get information on places like Russia in order to preserve our standing in the world. And so it demoralizes people like that. Now, maybe you can make the explanation that we're just flattering him to get a deal, but then it does put our allies and our partners at risk. And at some point, if they believe we're not going to stand up for their interests, then they're going to go make common cause. We're not the only ones who can find new partners around the world. So the next time China comes calling, or the next time, you know, that Vladimir Putin comes to town, well, maybe they roll out the red carpet for him too, because look what we've just said.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, our political panel this evening, joining us on a pretty incredible story. Thank you so much. And we'll have more on the stories that are going to set the agenda tomorrow in Washington, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, looking at live pictures of the White House, where tomorrow is expected to be a big day for the Republican tax agenda.
Set to meet. Imagine being a fly on the wall. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, and from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senate Majority Leader John Thune. The Senate Finance Committee Chair Mike Crapo and House Ways and Means Committee Chair Jason Smith will also attend, Kayleigh. They have a lot to figure out here. When we talk about reconciliation, it's not just Trump tax cuts, it's also the debt limit.
Yeah, and what the Senate wants to do and what the House wants to do, still not exactly the same thing. So some alignment needs to be found, and we'll have full reporting on that tomorrow, which you can always find in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal and online, and on this program. We'll see you back tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.